Hello fellow sim racers, and welcome to the second part of my look at the new Spirit of Le Mans DLC pack for Project Cars 2. So, in the first part of the video, I took a look at the 1971 themed content that SMS included in the DLC. If you haven't seen part 1, then a link should be appearing on your screen about now, and I'll also put one in the video description. For the rest of you, let's jump right in and take a look at some 2016 Le Mans prototype cars. Before I look at the cars individually, let's talk ERS deployment. For many, the 2014 LMP-1 cars in Project Cars 2 are horribly flawed, as ERS deployment is tied to throttle position. In essence, electrical deployment is activated at 90% throttle, which generally means running out of juice a quarter of the way into a lap. Well, I'm pleased to tell you that this is no longer an issue. All of the 2016 LMP-1H cars have fully manual hybrid deployment, so make sure you remember to map a KERS button to your wheel. Some of you may be thinking, wait, isn't there already an Audi R18 in Project Cars 2? And, well, you'd be right. The good news for Audi fans is that the Spirit of Le Mans pack brings you two more. The new R18s represent the updated 2016 model, which introduced a high nose, enlarged wheel covers, as well as changing from a flywheel-based KERS to the more ubiquitous battery-based systems. The two models offered in the pack cover the low downforce variant used at Le Mans and the high downforce variant used elsewhere, with this specific example being modelled on the car's appearance at Fuji that year. So, onto the in-game car. After driving the 71 sports cars, I must admit I was a little concerned that the LMP-1H cars would also leave me wanting more from the handling. However, it didn't take long for me to realise I had nothing to worry about. The Audi R18 drives beautifully. It's grippy and forgiving when you drive it at 95%, but as you approach the limit, it's a tricky beast of a car. Force feedback is excellent, and it's very communicative throughout, though the feeling you get through the wheel when you deploy hybrid energy is like nothing I've experienced in a racing sim. The closest thing I can compare it to is the feeling of torque steer you get when you're driving your mate's hot hatch like a bit of a yob. It's actually quite disconcerting, but oddly intuitive, and once you get used to it, it makes perfect sense. From my limited initial testing, it feels like the Audi's the fastest of the three LMP-1H cars, at least in Le Mans spec anyway, but it's also probably the trickiest to drive at the limit, owing to the fact that it's actually quite slidey near the edge of grip. Moving on, and it's another case of deja vu. To keep in line with the 2016 Le Mans theme, SMS have brought us the updated Toyota TS050. Again, the main differences are the higher front nose and bulbous wheel arches, while under the carbon fibre skin lies a revised hybrid power unit including a brand new ICE and electrical recovery, storage and deployment systems. I'll come right out and say it, the TS050 is my favourite car in this pack. There's something about the way it handles that just feels absolutely right to me. Right from the off, I felt like I could push the car. It's very responsive, and the force feedback, while lighter than the other two LMP-1H cars, is extremely communicative. While the R18 felt quite slidey and raucous on the limit, the Toyota's a bit more subtle and responds very well to a little bit of brake input to help rotate the car, and then the use of hybrid deployment to kill that rotation and leap right off the corner. Like the other LMP-1H cars in the pack, SMS have done a great job modelling the TS050. Externally, it looks great, and while sitting in the cockpit looks very good indeed, particularly in VR. Finally, I get the impression that the TS050 is probably the slowest of the three new LMP-1H cars, which is a real shame as it's so nice to drive. Now for the one a lot of you have been waiting for, the Porsche 919. Much like the car that inspired the 919's name, Porsche's first new endurance prototype in nearly 2 decades was short-lived but highly successful. After successfully dethroning Audi and seeing off the challenge of a rising Toyota, Porsche pulled the plug on the LMP-1H project after just 4 seasons. SMS have done a stellar job with this car. It looks great and it handles just as well in my opinion. Compared to the Audi and Toyota, the 919 sits somewhere in the middle in terms of both handling and outright pace. It's not quite as on edge as the R18 through the high speed stuff, but also it isn't quite as forgiving and intuitive as the TS050. And in terms of force feedback, this car is the best of the three in my opinion. I don't think it's such a controversial statement to suggest that the 919 is a better looking car than either of its contemporaries. And thankfully, SMS have done a bang up job of modelling the car in game. The interior in particular is an absolute work of art. As a final note, before I move away from the LMP-1H cars, all three have very good graphical representations of energy usage on the steering wheels, which is something some of the other major sims haven't quite managed to accommodate. Next up, the first of the two oddball choices in this pack, the Porsche 924 Carrera GTP. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this isn't a car that immediately springs to mind when you think Le Mans, but as a Group 4 car it does give you something to race the BMW M1 against. And perhaps most importantly, these Group 4 cars are perfectly suited to a bit of multi-class racing with the extensive class of Group C cars in Project Cars 2. I fully expected to dislike the 924, and happily I was completely wrong. Imagine that. Now, like a lot of the classic cars in Project Cars 2, the 924 is a little tame. You really don't have to be at all careful with your right foot. But other than that small gripe, the handling's really very good. This is another car that tends towards understeer unless you manage weight transfer through the corners, and combined with brakes that feel great and communicative force feedback, the driving experience, for me at least, is really good fun. I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised by this car, as the handling shares a lot in common with the BMW M1, which is in my opinion one of the better cars in Project Cars 2. The final car, and another oddball, is the Porsche 961. Constructed for the little utilised, by sports cars at least, Group B regulations, the single 961 chassis was entered in only 3 events: the 86 and 87 Le Mans races, and the 86 Daytona Finale 3 hours. It's not obvious why SMS elected to produce this car. Much like the real 961, there's not really a lot for it to race against, and as Porsche only produced one chassis, it's hardly a great contender for single-make racing either. That being said, SMS have sensibly added this car to the GTO class, where at least it seems to play well with the other cars. From a handling perspective, this car reminds me quite a lot of the Porsche cars in the recent Assetto Corsa DRM pack, but without the danger. There's absolutely massive turbo lag to contend with and huge amounts of understeer that need to be tamed. It's definitely a tricky car to get stopped and turned in. That being said, once you get back on the power, it's remarkably calm for a nearly 700 brake horsepower monster, which is a little bit disappointing if I'm honest. In my opinion, the LMP-1H cars are a hit, and I'm sure they'll be very popular. SMS have addressed the concerns many had with the previous generation of LMP cars and have absolutely delivered with the new models. They aren't perfect though, and one area that I haven't specifically addressed is sounds, which in general are improved but arguably still aren't quite right. But taking a look at the big picture, it feels like these 3 cars are a big step forward for Project Cars 2. Moving on, for a pack titled Spirit of Le Mans, there are some odd choices here. And while I applaud SMS for including cars from lower classes, the Porsches they have chosen make no sense to me. The same goes for including a non-Le Mans LMP-1 car. Personally, I would have rather seen a Jaguar D-Type and a Ferrari 250 included, as both are contemporaries of the excellent Aston Martin DBR1, which currently has nothing to race against, and both are Le Mans winners themselves. Others will argue for the 787B or the Peugeot 905, and I'd have no complaints there. So, all in all, the Spirit of Le Mans pack is, for me at least, a bit of a mixed bag. SMS have done a great job with the track and with the LMP-1H cars, but I can't help but feel like the 71 sports cars and those oddball Porsches are a little bit of a letdown. For many, the latter won't be an issue, as the handling characteristics of these cars are in line with some of the other classic content in Project Cars 2. And I fully accept that I'm probably expecting something from these cars that's just not part of the ethos SMS have employed with the Project Cars series. Ultimately, SMS have to be applauded for actually bringing these cars to the game. While their rivals constantly rehash new versions of the same safe modern racing car content, at least SMS takes risks, and they do deliver decent fields of classic racing cars from various eras. So while some of the content isn't everything I'd like it to be, I'm pretty happy to take the pragmatic view and be thankful for what's been provided here. So, that about wraps things up for this first look at the Spirit of Le Mans DLC. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you've got any suggestions for content you'd like to see on the channel in future, then please let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for donating your precious free time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.